This is the story of a poor seamstress who was supporting her family through hard work. She ran a small tailoring shop, and her sewing was highly praised throughout the neighborhood. Her stitching was so exquisite that even the wife of the richest landlord in the village got her clothes stitched by her. One day she saw that the clothes she had sewn were ready, but the landlord's wife had not sent anyone to collect them. At home, her father was very ill, and she needed to buy his medicines. She took the clothes and went to the mansion herself. When she arrived, she saw that the lady of the house had not yet come. She waited for an hour, and finally, the landlord's wife appeared, descending the stairs. She was wearing a bright red sari, a heavy necklace dangling around her neck, and she walked with an air of grace and pride. She glanced at the seamstress with a sideways look and said in a mocking tone, "This time, you took too long to stitch the sari." The seamstress panicked and immediately explained, "Begum Sahiba, I finished the stitching 2 days ago. I thought your maid would come to collect it, but when she didn't, I brought it myself." Begum Sahiba pressed her lips together in anger and muttered, "Let that Sakina girl come, I will ask her." Then she started unfolding the clothes one by one. After a while, her expression softened, and she praised, "The stitching is very good. I will try it on to see if the fitting is right or not." The seamstress breathed a sigh of relief. She felt that now she would finally receive the payment for her hard work. But just then, a commotion arose from one corner of the mansion. It seemed like something major had happened. All the servants ran in that direction, some carrying thick sticks, others holding staffs. Begum Sahiba also stood up anxiously and called the guard to ask, "What happened?" The guard, in a trembling voice, said, "Begum Sahiba, just now the gardener saw a large shape-shifting cobra in the lawn. It was coiled around a tree. Thankfully, the gardener spotted it in time. Soon they will catch it." Upon hearing this, everyone in the mansion gathered. The seamstress also became nervous, but she was more concerned about her payment. In a trembling voice, she said, "Begum Sahiba, please give me my money. I need to leave." Begum Sahiba glanced at her and carelessly said, "Yes, I will send the money through Sakina. I have more clothes for you to stitch as well." The seamstress's hopes were shattered. Disheartened, she left the mansion and went to the neighboring Aunt Ruqayya to ask for a loan. But Aunt Ruqayya looked at her with disdain and angrily said, "We are not a bank that will lend you money every time." However, her eldest daughter, Nagina Baji, was kind-hearted. She gave the seamstress the money. The seamstress looked at her with gratitude and promised to return it soon. After returning home, she bought medicine for her father and a little bit of vegetables. Her father lay on the cot, and her younger brother Suhail had returned from tuition. The three of them were each other's support. Their mother had passed away long ago, and now their father was paralyzed. If the seamstress did not have the skill of sewing, they might have starved. At night, when she told her father about the shape-shifting cobra in the mansion, his face tensed up strangely. He softly said, "One day, it had to return. After all, how long could it stay without taking revenge?" The seamstress was startled. "Father, what are you saying?" Her father took a deep breath and said, "If they killed it, it will return again. A shape-shifting cobra never dies. It is reborn after 100 years. The seamstress laughed. "Oh, father, these are just myths and stories." But the seriousness on her father's face made her uneasy. As the evening fell, the weather suddenly changed. A strong storm and red dust clouds shook the mud walls of their house. Nafisa shivered and began to feel afraid. She immediately called Suhail inside and set up their father's cot in the room. The night had grown quite late when suddenly there was a knock at the door. Nafisa was startled. Who could be visiting at such an hour? She called out from inside, "Who is it?" A deep voice responded from outside, "I am a traveler, wounded and in need of shelter for one night." Nafisa knew that their home had always been a resting place for travelers. But was it wise to let a stranger in at this hour? However, when she opened the door and saw the young man standing before her, she was left breathless. Deep green eyes, a fair complexion, and a princely presence. But his condition was terrible. His body bore deep wounds in several places, and his clothes were soaked in blood. Alarmed, Nafisa asked, "How did you get so badly injured?" He replied, "People attacked me. They left no part of me unharmed." but I will not spare them either." There was an eerie menace in his voice. Nafisa hesitated for a moment but then opened the door and let him in. He sat down by the pillar. Nafisa considered waking her father, but then she remembered his poor health. "Do you have any spare clothing?" he asked. Nafisa had only new clothes, but she suddenly remembered an old dupatta of hers. She took it out and handed it to him. His hands were wounded, so Nafisa herself began tending to his injuries. Her heart pounded loudly. She had never been so close to an unfamiliar man before. He sat silently, as if he had lost everything. When Nafisa asked if he wanted food, he said, "If I could get something to eat, I would be very grateful." Nafisa quickly brought him the leftover food from dinner. As she watched him, she wondered whose house such a strikingly handsome man had come to visit in the village. His eyes did not seem like those of an ordinary person. He spoke. "I apologize for troubling you in the middle of the night, but I had no choice. I barely escaped with my life, otherwise they would have killed me." Nafisa grew concerned. "Are your enemies from this village?" He nodded. "I cannot say much, but you can do me a favor. Let me stay here until my wounds heal, and please do not tell anyone about me." Without thinking, Nafisa replied, "You may stay here as long as you need. Our home is open to you." No one came or went. He kept staring at her with weary eyes before finally lying down on the ground. Perhaps he was too exhausted. Nafisa too fell asleep while watching him. When she woke up in the morning, she was startled. The stranger was nowhere to be found. There was not a single trace of him in the house, but he had said he would stay for 3 days. Where had he suddenly disappeared to? Lost in these thoughts, she began preparing breakfast for Abba and Suhail, but her heart was restless. Just then, her father called her. She set down the teacup and walked over to him. There was a look of astonishment on his face. "How did these strange marks appear in the courtyard?" he asked in a serious tone. Nafisa followed his gaze and saw unusual marks on the floor. Pretending not to know, she said, "Abba, I have no idea. You tell me, you have more experience." Her father took a deep breath and said, "These kinds of marks are usually found in fields where snakes make their homes. It looks like a snake has slithered away from here." Hearing this, Nafisa's face turned pale, but the next moment she laughed. "Abba, the snake was in the mansion, not here. You're just trying to scare me." Her father replied gravely, "I'm not trying to scare you, my child. I've seen many things in my life. These marks look like they belong to a snake." Nafisa brushed off his words, but questions began to stir in her mind. She was thinking about someone else. Who was he? Where had he gone? If only he would return so she could ask his name. Trying to shake off her restlessness, she started stitching clothes for the neighbor Kala's son's wedding. A little while later, Kala arrived to pick up the clothes. She looked at Nafisa intently and then said, "It looks like you'll have to remain unmarried all your life." Nafisa stared at her in surprise. Kala let out a heavy sigh and said, "Look, your father is a laborer, there's barely anything to eat at home, and your younger brother is still a child. In such circumstances, how will you get married?" Nafisa replied softly, "Kala, I'm not in a hurry to get married. If I can take care of my father and brother, that is enough for me." Kala placed a hand on her head and said, "May Allah give you strength, my child. But looking at you, I can't help but feel sorry." Nafisa chose not to respond. She was used to hearing such things. In the evening, Suhail returned from his tuition and said, "Baji, the teacher is asking for the tuition fee." Nafisa looked at him and nodded. "I'll arrange it in a day or two." She was angry at the employer who still hadn't sent the money through the maid. Perhaps she would have to go there again. Late at night, while she was sewing, she suddenly heard a soft but familiar voice behind her. "How are you?" She turned around quickly and was stunned. The same young man was sitting in front of her. Terrified, Nafisa asked, "How did you get inside?" He pointed toward the door. It was left open. Nafisa felt the ground slip beneath her feet. She had specifically told Suhail to make sure the door was properly locked. Panicking, she hurriedly shut the door. You said you would stay for 3 days. Where did you go? Nafisa asked. The young man smiled faintly. So, you were waiting for me? Nafisa felt embarrassed at his words. Maybe he had sensed her restlessness. Then, in a quiet tone, he said, I left for your own good. If someone in this house had seen me, it would have created trouble. Looking at him, Nafisa asked, Are you hungry? Would you like something to eat? The young man nodded in agreement. If I could get a little milk. Without saying anything, Nafisa brought him the milk that was kept for Abba and handed it to him. She saw that he was drinking the milk as if he was in desperate need of it. After finishing the milk, he returned the empty cup and said, You are a very kind girl. Nafisa remained silent upon hearing his words, but many thoughts were running through her mind. She asked him, Who are your enemies? Tell me, I can help you. The young man dismissed Nafisa's words and said, No, I have to take my revenge myself. I just need a little time. Nafisa was so engrossed in talking to him that she did not even hear Abba's voice. Mariam, my child, come here. Hearing Abba's voice, Nafisa panicked, stood up, and went inside. Abba said, Child, I have been watching for a long time. Who were you sitting outside and talking to? Your voice was clearly audible. Nafisa's heart started pounding. She glanced into the courtyard, but there was no one there. He had left. Quickly gathering herself, she said, Abba, I wasn't talking to anyone. You must have imagined it. Abba said anxiously, No, I saw it. It seemed as if someone was sitting in front of you. With great difficulty, Nafisa convinced him that he must have imagined it. When Abba went to sleep, she came back to the courtyard, but there was no one there. She felt sad that he had left without saying anything. The next morning, while Nafisa was preparing breakfast, she suddenly heard Baba shouting, Mariam, come here, child, look at this. Nafisa went outside and saw the same strange marks spread across the courtyard. Abba said fearfully, Mariam, you said that a snake was seen in the mansion, but now it seems that it is still alive and roaming in our village. There was fear in Abba's eyes, but Nafisa's face remained expressionless. A conversation of concern began between Nafisa and her Abba. Abba was convinced that the snake seen in the mansion was still alive and wandering around the village. Hearing this, Nafisa became worried and said, Abba, that snake was killed by the servants of the mansion. But Abba did not believe her words. That very day, Nafisa said to Abba, The mistress has not yet sent my sewing payment. I need to return money to Nagina Baji, so I am going to the mansion. She prepared Suhail's meal and set off for the mansion, on foot. The path was difficult and desolate, but she felt as if someone was following her. There was a strange rustling in the air, while a suffocating stillness surrounded her. Nafisa turned around and was shocked. He was standing right in front of her. His eyes had the same sparkle that always unsettled Nafisa. Smiling, he said, Wherever you go, I will find my way there too. Wherever you go, I will reach there too. Nafisa looked at him questioningly and said, Why can't you go to the mansion? Do you have a feud with someone there? He shook his head and said, Soon, you will know everything. But by the time the truth comes out, I may no longer be in this village. Nafisa, alarmed, said, God forbid you must stay here forever. Her heartbeat quickened, but she hurried toward the mansion. As soon as she reached, the mistress saw her and said, I forgot to give you your payment. There have been many troubles in the mansion lately. She held her head in her hands and called out to Sakina, Go, bring my purse from my room. Sakina glared at Nafisa angrily, and as Nafisa was stepping outside, she snapped, You still aren't satisfied? The mansion is facing so many troubles, and you came to ask for your money. Nafisa, fuming, retorted, Why should I be ashamed? I am the one running my household. We don't even have food to eat at home. Sakina sneered again and said, Here, the mistress is only worried about her son and husband. The entire family is in danger. The mistress keeps saying that what she feared has come true. No one in the mansion has eaten anything for 3 days. Hearing this, Nafisa became even more anxious. What calamity had struck that the people of the mansion had stopped eating altogether? When she reached home, she saw that Uncle Fazal Din was sitting with Abba. He was a servant at the mansion and often came to visit Abba. The two were talking in hushed tones, and Nafisa overheard Uncle Fazal Din saying, "Tomorrow, they are calling for a very famous snake charmer. He lives in the 7th village and is 90 years old. Wherever he goes, he immediately finds out where a snake is hiding." Nafisa was listening to everything, and deep inside she felt afraid. Abba said, "A bad deed always leads to a bad outcome. They should think about." It was said that after 20 years he would return and cause destruction. The two of them were discussing something deeply, but Nafisa was not included in the conversation. The next day, news spread that the snake charmer had arrived in the village. The entire village was searching for the snake that had entered the mansion and had been wounded when an attempt was made to kill it. However, it had disappeared without a trace. It was neither in the mansion nor anywhere in the village. Because of this, the landlord had summoned the snake charmer. That midnight, as Nafisa lay in bed, she sensed a rustling in the courtyard. Her eyes opened instantly. Startled, she rushed outside, and what she saw left her in shock. The young man was sitting in a corner, trembling in fear. Seeing his condition, Nafisa asked, "What happened?" The boy, his voice shaky, said, "I climbed over the wall to get here. If I hadn't, they would have killed me." Nafisa felt restless. She asked about his wounds, but the boy gave a faint smile and said, "I'm perfectly fine. But I want to tell you something. You are very beautiful, just like my Rupa." Hearing this, Nafisa was taken aback. "Who is Rupa?" she asked. The boy's green eyes filled with tears. "She was my love. Your eyes are exactly like hers. Every time I see you, I am reminded of her." A wave of disappointment settled in Nafisa's heart. So he already loved someone else. She thought, "I am just a poor seamstress, and this handsome young man, he deserves to be with a princess." Trying to compose herself, she asked, "Where did Rupa go?" The boy let out a deep sigh. "I wish she were alive. But she is no longer in this world." There was so much pain in his voice that Nafisa felt Rupa must have been truly fortunate to have been loved so deeply by him. A spark of fury ignited in the boy's eyes. "Rupa was taken from me," he said bitterly. "The grief of losing her has consumed my soul. I am burning inside, desperate to take revenge on my enemies." "Nafisa, I will come again," he said, and disappeared into the darkness of the night. The next day, Uncle Fazal Din came to Nafisa's Abba and said, "Come along. The snake charmer will search the entire village for the snake today. You must see this spectacle." At first, Abba refused, but when Fazal Din whispered something in his ear, he immediately got ready. A little while later, Fazal Din and Abba found the snake, but the wounded serpent was nowhere to be seen. Nafisa couldn't understand why Abba was so troubled. But the next day, something happened that left everyone in shock. The owner of the mansion stood at their doorstep with his men, and with him was an old snake charmer. The landlord roared in anger, "Nuruddin, you have hidden that snake in this house. Fazal Din has told us everything." Abba stood with his head bowed. "I don't know anything," he said softly. The landlord laughed mockingly. "If I'm right, be ready for punishment. I can even pull the dead out of their graves." At that moment, the snake charmer's flute echoed through the air. Suddenly, a long, thick snake appeared near the wall. It slithered behind the bushes and vanished. The entire village ran after it, but it was nowhere to be found. Nafisa was trembling. She turned to Abba and asked, "What is happening? Why is the landlord accusing you like this?" Abba took a deep breath and replied, "Because I know many of his secrets." Nafisa was stunned. "Were you a snake charmer?" Abba lowered his head. "This happened 20 years ago. Back then, both Chaudhry and I were well known. I was a great snake charmer, but after a tragic incident, I left this profession. Our village was built in a place where dozens of snakes slithered beneath the desert sand. Around the same time, the mansion had just been constructed, but in one hidden corner of the mansion, a pair of snakes had made their home. They were lost in their own world, as if in deep meditation. But when the landlords saw them, they wanted them dead. The fear of snakes haunted every human mind. I used to stay with my father all the time. I still remember the day when the landlord summoned Abba. He ordered him to kill the snake pair. Abba refused outright. "Never, I won't do this. If you kill a snake, his mate will haunt you for centuries, and if you kill the female, the male will never stop chasing you. One day, he will return." When Abba refused, the landlords were furious. They remained silent at that moment, but I had no idea what was coming. On my way back from the city, some men from the mansion kidnapped me. They dragged me to the mansion and said, "You're the son of a snake charmer. Play the flute, for us. Let's see where the snakes are hiding." Abba had refused, but now they had captured me. I had no choice but to obey. That night, a terrifying story was written. The moment I started playing the flute, the snakes swayed out of their hiding place. They looked young and innocent, so beautiful, their scales shimmering like gold. That snake pair is still etched in my memory. I was witnessing a horrifying scene when, as soon as I led them out, as soon as I saw them emerge, I immediately fled from there. But how was I to know that on that very night the serpent would lose the battle for its life? On the orders of the mansion's owner, his men killed the female serpent while the male serpent, in an attempt to save its life, disappeared somewhere. Now a celebration was taking place in the mansion because it had been cleansed of the serpent pair. They no longer had any fear. Several years passed. Suddenly, Abba passed away. I continued doing the same work, but one day, a venomous snake bit me. I collapsed right there. Fortunately, the snake's venom did not spread throughout my entire body. It only affected my legs. And today, I am confined to my bed, unable to move. But today, that village headman who came to our house had realized that the snake was present in our home. I, too, had begun to recognize its movements. Whenever you asked me, "Abba, how did these marks appear on the ground?" Or whenever I asked you, "Where did these marks come from?" you would deny knowing anything. You truly had no idea how those marks appeared. But I had come to recognize its movements and its traces very well. The snake was living right in our home. Then I tried to save its life and, in doing so, did not reveal this secret to anyone. Had seen it slithering on the wall 2 or 3 times, but today it has escaped from here. I don't know what it will do to me now. I fear that people might kill it too. But it has returned much stronger than before. It is possible that with its power it may wreak havoc in this village. When Abba told me this story, suddenly, the men from the encampment arrived. They angrily said to Abba, "Once again, it has managed to escape, but we will find it no matter what. Just like before, you want to save that serpent pair's life. You are our real enemy. That's why you hid the serpent in your house." Abba did not even consider it necessary to respond to them. Furious, they left, issuing threats. I was reassuring Abba that nothing would happen. If we have done nothing, then no one can harm us. There was no worry, no sorrow on Abba's face. At night, I was sitting at the sewing machine, stitching my clothes, when suddenly, I felt a presence behind me. I turned around and saw that the green-eyed, handsome young man was sitting right behind me. "What are you doing here?" I asked in astonishment. She said to him, and he said, "I have come to meet you for the last time." Hearing this, tears welled up in my eyes. I said to him, "Are you leaving this village?" He replied, "Yes, I am leaving this village because my revenge is complete. By morning, there will be an uproar in that mansion. But don't you want to know who I am and why I kept appearing before you?" Hearing his words, my heart started pounding. I wanted to tell him that it was the voice of my heart, that he kept coming before me because, deep inside, I had started loving him. Then he looked at me intently and said, "Ask your Abba about me, who I am. He not only knows me, but also recognizes me." Suddenly his eyes started glowing. "Don't be deceived, my child. This is not a human, but a shape-shifting serpent." I suddenly heard Abba's voice behind me. Terrified, I turned around and saw that Abba was standing right behind me. I was stunned to see the green glow in his eyes. His eyes were changing color, but he was looking at Abba with deep affection. Then he stepped forward and stood before Abba, saying, "Nuruddin, you tried to save my life before, and today you have saved me again. For that, I am grateful to you. But you could not save my mate. She died because of you. However, I later found out that you did try to save her. I regret that I left my venom in your body, but you survived. That was your good fortune. Now I am leaving. Your daughter is very kind. I wish for her destiny to be as beautiful as she is. I cannot repay you for what I have done, but before I leave, I am leaving something in your home that will prove to be a great blessing for both you and your daughter." Saying this, he cast one last glance at my face, and suddenly, he transformed into a serpent and slithered out of the house as if he had never been there. I stood there, stunned. I still couldn't believe that the handsome young man who was always present in our home was, in fact, a shape-shifting serpent. I was still in shock when Abba shook my shoulder to bring me back to reality. News spread like wildfire. The owner of the mansion had died. He had been bitten by a venomous serpent. This news was shocking to everyone. That day, Abba said, "We must leave this village before people start blaming us." Abba was deeply worried. I quickly started preparing to leave the house. I started gathering all our belongings, but suddenly, my eyes fell on a beautiful, shining object. As soon as I picked it up, Abba recognized it. "This is a diamond," he said. The serpent left it for us. I couldn't believe it. Abba carefully placed it in his palm and then wrapped it in a white cloth. We left the village and started a new life in the city. The diamond that the serpent had given us completely changed our lives. Its value was in the millions. Abba received the medical treatment he needed. Sohel got admitted to a good school, and I opened a grand boutique. It became one of the city's most famous and well-known boutiques under my name. No one could have guessed that this girl was once a poor seamstress who struggled to make ends meet. Abba would often tell me, "Now you should get married and start a new chapter in your life." But how could I tell Abba that the green-eyed serpent had captured my heart? Even though he was a serpent, he was the first person to truly enter my life.